Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, we decided to be, less controversial than talking about who's going to be president. We're going to talk a little bit more about snaps. Not just to be controversial, but I did the video on the neckbeards versus the suits, explaining why we will not come to a general consensus on snaps in the Linux community. And then some people on the more pro-snap side are yelling at Linux Mint for making it harder to use and removing options from the user by blocking snaps. And then the people on the Linux Mint side are jumping out and saying, I'm sorry, Ubuntu is the one removing the option because everything's snap by default first. And the question becomes, which is the correct stance? Well, we're not necessarily going to just say who makes it easier to do what the other one does by default. What we are going to do is boot up both of these. I'm going to show you the steps to make Ubuntu run without snaps. I'm going to show you the steps to make Linux Mint run with snaps. And then we are going to let you decide which one makes it easier to run the system in the contrary way. There might very well be a reason you want to run Linux Mint and use snaps. There might very well be a reason you want to run Ubuntu and not use snaps. So we're going to go ahead and have a look at this. Now, first and foremost, let me go ahead and start by saying that Ubuntu has no official installation steps by which you need to follow if you want to run Ubuntu without snaps. They pretty much say, you're using snaps. Deal with it, bro. And I think that that is part of the attitude and the mindset. The best guide I've seen is this one here from TechWiser, which has some of the information about removing snaps. But even this, even though it's fairly new, is already out of date because they've missed a couple of steps here. So with this, they go into a little bit about the snap debate. And the question becomes, if you want to run your system without snap, and it's your system, that should be your right, how do you do that? He talks about first removing snaps. We have our snap list. Then he talks about removing and purging snaps to remove all of the excess files. I found you don't really need to do that steps. Then you have to go in and run an rmrf in your var cache file, which could be dangerous. And basically you need to remove all of the snapd cache. Then you need to remove snapd and the GNOME software snap plugin. And this is actually why this is out of date, because GNOME software plugin is not installed on Ubuntu by default. They are assuming you already have that. The new version of Ubuntu runs the Snap Store, not the GNOME software. And then you need to rmrf your snap directory in your home folder, and now you're set to go, except following these steps right now, you don't have a software store. So I'm going to show you the steps that you need to add the GNOME software store and then remove the Snap Store. And you have to do it in that order because, yes, if you install the GNOME software store, it will automatically install snapd and it will automatically configure your GNOME software center to use snaps. So if you follow this step and then add the GNOME software center, you're going to get snaps back on the system. So we're going to walk through that. Here's just a little bit more. Has Ubuntu software been renamed to Snap Store? This is from 25 days ago. And yes, you need to install GNOME software if you don't want it. I need to get this cat off the desk because he's throwing fur all over the place. All right. Now, if you want to run the contrary, though, if you want to go onto Linux Mint and you want to run snaps, here Linux Mint has a user guide and they have a specific place on their Snap Store. If you can find the Linux Mint user guide, you can search for snap. This will show up. It goes through the reason why they have disabled snap. You can agree or disagree with that if you like. That would be your call. But then they talk here about if you would like to re-enable it, you simply need to run this command. Again, running an rm in your etc directory. At least this one does have the rmrf, but this one here, again, a little bit tricky because you have to do this. However, I've detailed before, you actually just need to open this file up and edit 3 lines of code in this file. I mean, that's all it takes. And then you need to install snapd. So Ubuntu does not give us a guide, assumes you're using snaps no matter what. Linux Mint says we don't like them by default, but if you want to enable them, here's the exact steps you need to do. So let's go ahead at this point and we are going to start with Ubuntu, and then we're going to show you here the steps that it's going to take. So let's go ahead and boot up Ubuntu, and then we're going to show you the steps that it takes to remove snaps. Now, what we're not going to do here is I'm not going to block snaps. If you want to block snaps, just grab that file that Linux Mint has, and I'll link the code and file and stuff in the comments there so you can actually block the snaps if you'd like to by default. We're not, as I said, we're not going to be doing that. I'm just going to show you how to remove them. And then just be careful that things you install are not re-adding snap if you don't like it. And that's kind of that. So let's go ahead and get booted on into Ubuntu. All right, so here we are booted onto the Ubuntu desktop. Now, all of these, both of these virtual machines, I should say, I installed the software and then I ran our updates. So we should have the latest version. Any updates are new within the last couple hours, and we're going to go ahead and ignore them. So in Ubuntu, of course, we have the Ubuntu Software Store, which is a Snap store. So this is going to have a series of applications, and it's going to give you the ability to download software. Default is Snap, and then you have the option to choose to use a repository version instead. So we'll go ahead and have a look at that. Now, of course, there is still the Ubuntu bug that is still here, that because they're downplaying everything in the repository, most things in the repository do not actually have the proper logos. So it looks really ugly when you're looking at non-Snap version of this. So for example, if we do a search for Kdenlive, there should be a Snap and a repository version. So you can see that this one is one where they do have their icons working by default. So this one over here, it is from the Snap store. You can come up here to the channel. You can grab whichever version you like. So we have a stable, we have a candidate, we have a beta, and we have an edge. Now, it is possible to hold back some Snap packages. You're not going to do that from the software store, but you can choose which pathway you would like to be on. So let's go ahead and grab this one here. This one here you can see is from the repository. There's no source here, so you have just the version that is in the repository. So that is kind of what you're looking at here. As far as doing these steps, you're going to be having to run in a terminal to do all these commands here. So let's go ahead and start with a snap list. So there are several snaps on here. We have Core 18, we have the GNOME 334, we have GTK themes, we have the Snap Store, and we have Snapd. Now, to easily follow along here with some of the steps, I did actually open up our web browser and I gave ourselves the bookmarks to these two files, which I will link them down below. So briefly though, what we're going to do is the first step we're going to want to do is install the GNOME Software Store, because the GNOME Software Store has snaps as a default. So if you remove the snaps first and then install the GNOME Software Store, it's going to reinstall Snapd. So what we're going to do first is we want to do a sudo apt install. Let's go ahead. Yeah, I don't think we need to run an update. Probably should run an update, but since I just ran that an hour ago, it should be fine. So install GNOME Store, enter our super secret password. That's definitely not 123. And here it asks us, would we like to install it? So when we install it, you can see what it's going to install is the GNOME Software Common, GNOME Software Plugin for Snap. And again, the GNOME Software Plugin Snap is going to, by default, install Snapd if Snapd is not installed. So that's why you have to do this step first. Go ahead and do that. Now, if you want to run Flatpaks, you can just go ahead and install the GNOME Software Plugin Flatpak if you would like to run the Flatpak. It's basically the same exact thing as this, only it replaces the word snap for Flatpak. All right, so now that that is on, now our steps are going to be, we can just follow through this guide here. We don't need to run the list. We don't need to uninstall these. When we actually remove snaps, it's going to actually remove all of the snap packages anyway. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy these. Now, remember, be very, very careful. Anytime you are copying something from the internet and pasting it into a terminal, particularly if it has sudo rm in it, be terrified. Okay, that could mess up your system if you do it wrong. This is why I like that Linux Mint has an official guide. This is a website from the internet. that I have to rely on rather than using an official guide. Linux Mint, while they do give us a sudo rm command, it is an official guide from the official distro manager. So we're going to go ahead and run this command that I know is not going to kill everything. Now I need to purge snapd and the snap software GNOME software plugin snap. So that software, again, is added by installing the GNOME software store. So I need to go ahead and remove those applications. All right. And then our next step, we're going to be removing our snap directory from our main system. Now we should be good to go. So at this point in time, we just need to reboot the system. So let's go ahead and do a sudo reboot. And we should have Ubuntu set up. And in place of having the Ubuntu store, we are going to have the GNOME Software Center. And then the GNOME Software Center should already be populated with the repository. So we'll come on back when we're up. All right, so we are now rebooted. You'll notice that we don't have the software icon here anymore because we've actually removed that. So I can come in here, find software. I can go ahead and add that back to my panel if I'd like to. And now if I boot this guy up, this is the GNOME Software Center. And so the GNOME Software Center should now populate with all of our applications from the basic Ubuntu repository. So if I want to come back here and I want to do a search now for Kdenlive, well, you should only see a single option for Kdenlive now. And notice that we don't have the pretty icons. So here's Kdenlive. It is the version from the repository. So this is not a snap version. Let's just go ahead and have a look at, let's look at audio video. Give it a second to populate data. And you can see some software is coming with its logos. Some software is not. And so you remove snaps and you really don't have that good of a user experience. We don't have any user guides about how to officially do that. And it generally is not their intention of running your system the way you want to run your system. But nevertheless, you can go ahead and do that and it works out just fine. So there is Ubuntu. Now we're going to go over to Linux Mint. We're going to look at what it takes to get Snap installed and have a software store so that you can install things in a GUI. All right, so here we are on Linux Mint. And with Linux Mint, of course, the issue over here is that you can't do any snaps by default. Of course, the software manager does integrate with Flatpaks automatically. But if we go ahead and do a snap list, here you can see command is not found. And if we wanted to do a sudo apt install snapd, then you will see that it has no install candidate. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to fix this. Once again, just like in Ubuntu, I did bookmark the page. And with the page bookmarked up, then we'll just be able to go right to the official repository there. So this is the official guide from the Linux Mint developers. They went into their challenge as to why that's disabled. And now if you want snaps, you simply have to run one line of code. Again, sudo rm is dangerous. But this, at least the difference here is this is actually from the developer's site. So that is all we need to do to enable snap. Just do a snap, just do an apt update. And let's go ahead and do a sudo apt install snapd. And that's all it takes. Now we have snaps running on our store. So there's one more step that we want to do, and that is that we would like a GUI version to install snaps to. Otherwise, you are going to be dependent on running the terminal for what you need to do. And so when this is done updating, which it is now we just need to do a snap install snap-store. It's going to prompt us for our password. So go ahead and enter your password. And now it's actually going to be looking for the Snap Store. And it is downloading the Snap Store from the channel stable. So now we're setting up the Snap Store. And now again, anytime we're doing manipulations with snaps, in order to get things in your menu, you need to at least log out. We'll just go ahead and reboot the system when this is done with doing its update. And then you'll be able to see that Linux Mint will now have a full snap store, a full GUI snap store. You can install any snaps available on Ubuntu. And that's all there is to it. So which one makes it easier to run contrary to the way that you might want to run the system? Well, very clearly, it's Linux Mint. Anybody who says a new user can't do that, I'm sorry. That's simply not true. We're going to go ahead and wait for all this to finish up. Then I'm going to reboot the system. I'm going to show you guys what the Snap Store is going to look like, and then we will get to our final conclusions. All right, so here we are on the desktop, and somewhere in here we will have the Snap Store. So if you want to install a snap, you just boot up the Snap Store and go hunt for what you need to find, and then you can go ahead and install any snaps that you would like to install. So here we are. Let's go shopping. So, for example, if you would like the Kdenlive version that Kdenlive should be there. Did I spell that wrong? There it is. Must have spelled it wrong. All right, so here you can see that this is installing us from the Snap Store. Now, this one here, it does not look like I can choose which source I'm coming from. If you can, maybe it's somewhere else. Let's double check here. There's About the Snap Store. Let's go ahead and back up. So if you do want to install Chromium, for example, we should be able to find the Chromium browser right here. So there you go. You can install your Chromium browser there from the Snap Store. And that's all it takes to get Snap running on Linux Mint. Nice and simple. Of course, we still do have our basic Linux Mint Software Center for anything that is not related to Snap will be over here. So repository and Flatpaks over in our old store, and anything Snap related will be now in our nice GUI Snap Store. So we can actually go back, we can hunt for things, we can kind of pull stuff up, hunt around for what we have. Just give it a second here. Each category, it should hopefully auto-populate. There it goes. All right, so there we are. We can kind of see what we have, all sorts of Snap packages in there. And that's all there is to it. So for anybody saying that's complicated or hard, I'm sorry. You're just mad and saucy that Linux Mint blocked Snap. So there's my take. Which one of these makes it actually harder for you to do what the other one does by default? Well, Ubuntu makes it harder. Hands down. I usually, in these distro wars, I will kind of not really pick a side. I tiptoe around it. If you want this, you want this, you want this, want this. So let's go ahead and review. Why do I come to that conclusion? Ubuntu seems to want you to use snaps, has not looked at fixing icons for the repository applications, has no official guides for removing snaps should you not want to do it. It's a longer process, and you have to do it in order, and there's several things you need to do in order to remove snaps. Linux Mint, on the other hand, it has its concise reason, agree with it or disagree with it, why you may or may not want to run snaps. It explains their decision, and then it says on their official user guide, if you still want snaps, run this one line of code. Then you can update your basic apt update, which I don't want to consider the apt update and the apt install snapd. I don't necessarily consider that extra steps to do. Those are basic package management. And if you want the GUI application, just install the Snap Store. And that's it. And it's all from the official thing. You don't need to copy something from a random website online. You're actually taking something directly from the user guide in Linux Mint. Now, should they have given you a toggle button? Because of the philosophical disagreements they have, I don't think it's a viable solution. Should they have packaged Chromium as the deb package? I agree with that. They should have probably packaged the Chromium deb package as the one chief package that is not available in the repository anymore. I agree with all that. But who makes it easier to do what the opposite distro does easily? Linux Mint makes it easier. They've given you the choice, and this is why I've always said from the very beginning, Linux Mint has preserved your choice. Ubuntu generally has not. That's my take. Let me know your take. Thanks again for the supporters who help support the show on Patreon or on thinklifemedia.com, and we will catch you guys next time.